Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get this started. I hope everyone is able to join and seated comfortably. I'm Sunil Verma. I'd like to welcome you to today's cybersecurity webinar. I'm joined here by Daniel Patfield, who's the head of program cyber and national security at Tech UK. We got Kostap Mede, head research and cyber threat intelligence at Cybel. Narayan Neelakantan, who's a co-founder and CEO at Black Armor, and Rob Taylor, who's a senior security incident handler at Mail. As esteemed speakers and panelists will be taking you through the cybersecurity topics and expect the session to run for around 45 to 50 minutes. The slides and speaker notes will be made available on our website later this week, and the easiest way to find them would be to visit our website, www.networkscience.ai, and put the webinar into the search box. If you're not able to stay with us throughout this session, a recording of today's webinar will be made available on the website by close of day tomorrow. With questions, if you'd like to submit your questions as they occur to you throughout the presentation, we'll then put the most frequently asked question to the speakers before we close today. Our panelists will try to answer as many questions as possible. For questions that we don't have time to get to will be posted on blog by next week. So please look out for the news about that on social media. This will be broadly our agenda for today's session. Hello, everyone. I'm Sunil Verma. I come with over 25 years of experience and I'm a lead advisor from Fortune 500 companies, multinationals, private and public sector enterprises. I have helped shape some of the largest digital analytics and cyber initiatives at a large scale for various sectors. In addition to being the board of advisor to Network Science, I'm also leading digital analytics and cyber business for leading consulting firms like EY, FTI Consulting in the past. I'm also a senior business leader and experienced thought leader and will be the moderator of this event today. Before we get into the session, I'd like to walk you through a brief introduction of network science. I will start with the video followed by a few slides. All right. Last year has been a year of many changes in our lives, and we certainly have lived through a year like it previously. I think it's fair to say all of our personal and professional lives have been touched by changes that we have experienced during this past year. The same is true for the threat landscape as well. There have been a number of incidents that we have seen over the years in the way that bad guys are operating. Some of them are long-term changes. Others are specific changes that we have only seen last year. But they all have invoked a sense of panic, which in turn gave rise to adoption of next-gen practices, advanced predictive technologies built on deep tech such as AI, machine learning, blockchain, AR, IoT, robotics, and etc. To this endeavor, network science has been launched with an objective to partner with enterprises across 4 vectors. That is, zero cost transformation, big and fast cost optimization while transforming performance, zero gravity growth, accelerating business growth without constraints, zero trust risk management, manage enterprise risk by design, 0 to 1 innovation, build competitive advantage by increasing the innovation quotient. Network Science is co-creating deep tech innovation with global enterprises. Network Science is proud to collaborate with business on their journey towards meaningful change, championing and driving innovation. This is achieved by harnessing the power of various deep technologies, including AI, machine learning, blockchain, AR, IoT, robotics, in domains like fintech, Industry 4.0, sales technology, cybersecurity, and control, allowing us to help enterprises become more efficient, effective, and reliable. Our mission is to take deep tech into the world stage and provide effective solutions to drive real societal, environmental, and industrial change. Leveraging our deep technology, clients have been able to, among others, provide real-time visibility across supply chain for EU's largest third-party logistics provider company, provide remote assistance using AR for EU's defense manufacturer. As we've been assisting on various different use cases, we have been working with world's leading enterprises such as News Corp, Toyota, Motherson Sumi, Sanofi, Volkswagen, and world's largest social media company. With this, I'd like to hand over to Dan. Before I hand it over to Dan, I'd like to introduce Dan, who leads the Tech UK cybersecurity program, having originally joined Tech UK in August 2017 as a program manager working across the cyber and defense programs. Key focus of his work is to strengthen the public-private partnership across cybersecurity to support further development of UK's cybersecurity policies. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Sunil, and good afternoon, everyone, or evening for those of you that are in the UK. And a big thanks from me to Sunil and the Network Science team for inviting me to join the event today. Tech UK is delighted to support what looks to be an excellent agenda and to start our engagement and partnership off with Network Science going forward. I suppose I should start by talking very briefly about what Tech UK is and does for those of you that aren't aware of us. Essentially, we're the National Trade Association for Technology and Digital Sectors in the UK. We've got a membership of around 850 companies, ranging from the big tech behemoths like Google, IBM, Microsoft, right through to the smallest innovators and SMEs across 21 different sectors, ranging from defence, central government, financial services, and also some programs that look specifically at some of the emerging technologies that we'll be discussing today. On the screen there is a slide that just encapsulates a quote from our president that kind of tries to give a sense of what Tech UK's mission is. I lead the cybersecurity program, which I suppose looks to develop the market for cybersecurity technologies in the UK, whether that be technologies that the public sector can take on or the private sector, as well as looking at developing the exports market for cyber technologies. And on the other side of the coin, I suppose we also lobby government on behalf of members, for example, around the National Cybersecurity Strategy that governs all aspects of UK government interventions in the cybersecurity arena. But enough of that. I really wanted to focus my brief presentation on two key points. First, I want to talk a little bit about the strength of the cybersecurity industry and how we should all be talking about cybersecurity maybe a little bit differently to how we have in the past. And secondly, I'll have a go at tackling the title question head on. So if I start with this slide, which is looking at the state of the UK sector and highlighting the strength of cybersecurity within the UK. Now, I'm conscious that this isn't an audience that's limited to the UK, but I think the trends that we can see in this slide will be seen across all regions and nations. So ultimately, the pandemic has seen people accelerate digital transformation, whether at work or at home. All these changes in how we work from home or shop online are underpinned by cybersecurity technologies. And this transformation's happened at a much quicker rate due to the pandemic. ultimately fostering trust more quickly in emerging technologies that have often offered alternatives to those old ways of working and doing business that we knew before 2019. Now, during that process, we've seen some huge successes in this space, and I think should be shouting much more loudly about that as a sector, whether that's as a UK sector looking at this 8.9 billion's worth of revenue, for example, so we see the sector as a whole, or whether it's those breaches that we've either avoided or overcome. We've obviously seen some really high profile breaches in the last 2 years, but more than that, we've seen cyber technologies working to underpin the technologies that have been adopted in those times. So the scale of success is much bigger than the scale of the failure. But still too often in organizations, we see cybersecurity viewed as simply a risk to be managed or something that's the purview of one team, whether that's the IT team or it's a certain individual who's responsible for cyber. And I don't think that's the best way to go about it. Cyber technologies are a huge business enabler, something that drives growth and drives vital business functions, whether that be growing bottom line or whether it's protecting existing services. It's also everyone's responsibility from the boardroom right down to the front line of all organisations. So every citizen should have a certain level of cybersecurity awareness and hygiene, because as we see technology adoption grow, so does the threat surface which cyber criminals are looking to exploit and breach. And every week we see more potent attacks from groups of cyber criminals that are learning just as fast as we are learning how to protect them. Now, this slide here shows, talks to my next point, which is the final point I really wanted to hammer home today. And it's about, it gives a roundabout answer to the question posed by the title of the webinar. So deep tech and emerging technologies from AI and quantum to AR, VR, biotechnology are all sectors which Tech UK has programs dedicated to. All pose real opportunities to enhance organisations and ultimately to citizens across sectors and regions. All have an important relationship with cybersecurity solutions too. So if I take an example, take AI as perhaps the quickest maturing example, we see that adoption of AI can only happen when users trust in the security of the solution. But on the reverse of that, we see that AI technologies have the capacity to improve existing cybersecurity approaches across the domain. Now, if you go back to my previous slide, take the title, the deep tech predicts and prevents cyber attacks, rumor or reality. I think we can all comfortably answer that in the affirmative, but only insofar as we can use technology to better inform ourselves as to breaches or threats. Ultimately, any successful mitigation against these threats is based on a golden triangle, really, of technology, yes, but also process and people. Technology is only useful insofar as it can be effectively harnessed by organisations and people to support decision-making or to reduce staff resources spent on those monotonous tasks they might have done previously, whilst unlocking time for those things only humans can do, like make informed decisions. And the process element is the role of the organisation, ensuring that within organisations' roles and responsibilities are clear, and that organisations are constantly developing security-aware cultures, which is always an ongoing process that's always has to be renewed. So I suppose, in summary, what I'd say to end my opening interjection here is that emerging technologies are playing an ever-increasing role, but they're only ever part of the picture, and they've got to be used in conjunction with the other two elements here to successfully mitigate against any threats. Now, that's a huge canter through some pretty in-depth subjects that we can maybe bring out in the Q&A, but I'll end my initial 5 minutes here and look forward to answering questions later. And I think I'm handing back to Sunil.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for bringing up the industry insights and perspectives and how the market is reacting and preparing for addressing the cyber needs more better in future. Thank you so much. With that, I'd be moving. If please feel free to post your questions, and we'll be trying and addressing at the end of this session today. So I really encourage all the audience to keep sending your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. With that, I'd like to move to our next speaker, Kostov Mede, who heads the Research and Cyber Threat Intelligence function at Cyber, an emerging cyber threat intelligence, cybercrime monitoring, and mitigation service provider. In a career spanning 2 decades, Kostov has also previously led the Cyber Defense Center operations for the Resilience Group to enhance threat detection and incident response capabilities of cybersecurity teams. Welcome, Kostov Mede, over to you. And please let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sunil, for the introduction. Good afternoon and good evening to all the attendees and my fellow panelists. So essentially the topic which I'm going to speak about today is about deep tech, about the advances in artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, and how these technologies and initiatives which are happening on the technology side, how they enhance and improve cyber threat intelligence capabilities for today's cyber defenders, right? So initially a quick poll and then we get started. Okay, so I hope everyone has put in their votes.
Kostov will wait for 1 more minute. I think the users are responding.
Sure.
Have you ended the poll? Right. We got the poll ended.
Excellent.
Okay. Could you see the result?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So maybe we can go ahead with the presentation, Costa.
Okay. Thanks, Sunil. If you can just progress the slide. Okay, great. Yeah, so let me just start off by sharing some interesting and perhaps worrisome data for all of us here. This is some of the commercially available data for dark web related activity pertaining to cybercrime. And if you just put a glance on some of these statistics here, right, you can typically hire an attacker for close to $250 for doing a hit on a particular target. If you look at some of the advertised services that are available, spear phishing, denial of service attacks, this typically shows you how ridiculously easy it is getting for motivated cyber criminals to actually carry out a sophisticated attack just under $1,000. And as you can see, most of the security sensitive information such as vulnerabilities, stolen code signing certificates, compromised credentials, compromised access to network devices, all these are being treated as a commodity and being traded on the dark web, right? So overall, we are all witnessing industrialized cybercrime era where it is becoming extremely simple to target organization and companies for unlawful gain. And especially the worrisome fact is that cryptocurrency, the rise of blockchain, Bitcoin, and Monero, and all these cryptocurrencies is actually aiding the cyber criminals, right? A recent blockchain analytics company put out some astounding figures, which said that close to $330 million worth of Bitcoin was actually transacted on the blockchain, and it was all attributed towards ransomware-related illicit funds. So that's the scale of the problem, today that we are facing. And as rightly pointed out by most panelists, ransomware happens to be one of the topmost threats which our businesses faces today. Yes, Sunil, we can move to the next slide. So with this information, which is so easily accessible to various threat actors, right? Let me just show you how a typical targeted attack campaign of today looks like. So basically an attack campaign starts off with an initial access broker reconnaissing a particular target, gathering details related to the vulnerabilities in that infrastructure, trying to send phishing mails or malware-laden mails to these target companies' employees, setting up phishing domains, setting up infrastructure to launch these attacks. And then once the employees are compromised, gathering all these details and then putting up for sale on the dark web. So basically this phase is called as the pre-breach phase, where there is an initial harvesting of the user credentials and setting the stage for a active attack, which happens soon enough, right? And in the active breach phase, basically whenever any threat actor or ransomware group goes about procuring some of these credentials, they then launch a detailed attack or a long-standing attack where they take over accounts, they compromise servers using some vulnerabilities which are exposed, and they start to do the lateral movement. They move inside the network of the organization. They basically exploit the internal unpatched systems of the client environment. They plant backdoors so that they can come back into the network and gain access anytime. And once they have a hold of the sensitive data of that organization, they start exfiltrating the data outside. the client's environment, and then follows the encryption tactic, followed by ransomware demands. And if the ransom is not paid, then the final step in the attack life cycle is basically publishing this data on a dark web forum, free for download, right? So this is typically an attack campaign, that is being observed over the past few years, right? This is standard modus operandi of the attackers. Now, the point to note here is while all this happens, there are definite breadcrumbs, or you can say digital footprints, which are available on the dark web and as well as the surface web, right? And smart threat intel teams who are able to harness various threat intel sources will be able to get a sniff of these. Yes, Anil, we can move to the next slide. So while all these attacks happen, right, and there is a concerted effort by various CERT teams, various security research companies, a lot of incident response companies who are involved in responding and remediating a specific data breach. Over a period of the last 10 years, a huge volume of knowledge base has been generated by the security community. And all this has been contributed by various security vendors, researchers, the white hat people, right, to give back to the community and strengthen the incident response capabilities for organizations, right? And today, because of this effort, which is a joint effort, there is a huge volume of intelligence around various threat actor groups, the kinds of tools that they use, the kind of tactics and procedures they adopt to typically compromise organizations. And as a result, there is almost 10 years worth of threat intel data which already lies in the public domain. So if you look at some of the data available on the dark web, there's almost 2.2 billion records which are available related to cyber threat related indicators on the dark web today. So the point I'm trying to make here is, because of the efforts of, the defenders and the huge volume of research which is available, right, it is all ripe for exploitation by the good guys so that they can bolster the defenses of the organizations. You can move to the next slide. So because of this data which is historically available, right, and there is a lot of security intelligence which is also available from various service providers, consulting companies, incident response companies, right? There is also a lot of insight which is available, on the surface web as well. So, for example, the who is information about the domains which are registered, the DNS attributes of those domains. They actually reveal a lot of insight into suspicious behavior. So just for the statistics, there are almost 200,000 new domains which are registered every day, and almost 70% of these new domains are malicious in nature. And all this information is readily available for threat intelligence professionals. If you look at the dark web chatter, if you look at the various mass scanner related activities which are available on the internet for analysis, all these are actually precursors for threat intelligence professionals to analyze, look at, and then prepare for an impending cyber attack. It's just that threat intelligence teams just need to know what data or signals to look for and how to harness that data using big data, ML, and AI technologies to be able to predict and attacks. Next slide, Sunil. So let me come to the machine learning and AI applications for threat intel. So as you can see, you already have a lot of historical data for context, and we also have a lot of real-time data or near real-time data which is streaming in from various sources, which is called open source intel, right? And given the right set of tools, right set of algorithms, and right set of techniques, it is actually very easy, to identify some of the use cases which can help us create these early warning signals. So let me quickly cover 4 specific use cases for machine learning and threat artificial intelligence, which could be used effectively in cyber threat intel. The first thing is for malware detection. So there is a huge repository of APK files which is available to researchers, and there is also a huge repository of malicious or known bad files which are available, right? So using machine learning algorithms and learning models, it is actually possible to identify maliciousness of application by looking at various metadata elements such as app permissions, which the application is asking for, the specific strings or code patterns which are available in the code, or looking at metadata around where this particular app is hosted. All these are actually very, very useful signals to correlate and derive the badness of that particular application. And some of these elements have been very effectively being used to analyze and identify suspicious malware. So that's one prominent use case where machine learning is being widely used. Next slide. When it comes to detecting phishing attacks, as I mentioned in my earlier slide, attackers generally tend to set up infrastructure and tend to set up phishing domains to target a particular client. And that is exactly when threat intelligence personnel have an opportunity to keep looking at some of these domain registrations, keep looking at various contextual information from these domains. For example, which are the ASNs, which are the registrar and the registrant companies, when was the domain created, what was the IP address, what was the reputation of the IP address, what are the DNS attributes like the TTL values. All these things put together and fed into a machine learning algorithm can actually yield a lot of insight into the badness of a particular domain. Lexical analysis also yields a lot of insightful information. For example, malicious domains are known to have very, very peculiar or specific strings which are being used to create them. For example, the number of dots, hyphens, or number of digits. These are an indicator of malicious domains as well. And obviously for weightage, you have blacklists and whitelists, which can be used to increase the confidence score for a particular inference. So put together, machine learning can be used very effectively to detect phishing domains being registered, and based on the badness, they can be classified either as malicious or benign. Coming to vulnerability intelligence, we already have a wealth of information available in the NVIDIA database. Close to 160,000 vulnerabilities today exist in the database, and they keep adding new vulnerabilities as soon as vendors start publishing them. There is also a very useful database reference, which is the ExploitDB, which has a list of working exploits for these vulnerabilities. And you have the real-time threat intel feed coming in from mass scanner activity, where there are solutions which tell you what type of vulnerabilities are being searched for by various threat actors. So putting together or combining these various elements, it is very much possible to identify the exploitability for a particular vulnerability. So you can look at things such as which vendor or product vulnerability exists, what are the keywords in the text descriptions, what is the CVSS score for that vulnerability, combine all this information and then assign an exploitability factor for that vulnerability. Now, how it can be exploited for vulnerability intelligence is that if you have a very high exploitability score, it means that there is a high chance that an attacker may be able to exploit this vulnerability and cause a targeted attack. And if the exploitability quotient is low, it means that you can still have a time to wait and watch before you actually start to patch that vulnerability. A very useful indicator of analysis. And finally, using graphical models, you are able to do a lot of mining and analytics on threat intelligence data to identify relationships between victims, threat actors, what type of malware they are using, what infrastructure do they set up, what are the TTPs, and which wallets do they use for doing the unauthorized fraudulent transactions. So graph models actually allow you to identify and reveal these relationships and bring more context for cyber defenders to identify IOCs and then do the threat actor attribution. So in fact, I see a huge potential and adoption of ML and AI in cyber threat intelligence, and we are only going to see a lot of interest in this subject and maturity as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really very insightful and detailed presentation, and thanks for sharing real life use cases that's being used in the industry. With that, I would move forward and introduce next speaker, Narayanan Neelakantan, who is the co-founder and CEO at Black Commerce, and is a highly accomplished, energetic, visionary strategist and a thought leader backed by 18 years of record of group up success in information security and IT. He is proficient in managing large-scale projects as well as critical operations with exceptional level of integrity, work ethics, and drive to achieve results. Welcome, Narayanan. Over to you. And please let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Sure. Thanks, Sunil. And a very good evening to everybody in India and afternoon to people in Europe and Middle East. It's great to speak to you all. Probably you can go to the next slide. I guess it will throw up the poll. And I'll
yes. Yeah. So it's time for a poll. Yeah.
So I'll take a pause while everybody selects their option.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a huge engagement out here. I request everyone to participate in the poll. Yeah, we see about 86% agreeing, for zero trust security, out of which 50% is strongly agreeing and 34% agreeing to the fact.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So the second question, we see how important do you think the decentralized nature of blockchain will be in identity management and access control? Again, we see majority of them saying very important, about 58%. And what, according to you, is the most important benefit of zero trust security? Again, remote work and cloud adaptability. I think 42% say it's its more important benefit. With last question, in your view, which is the most important benefit offered by consolidation of point security solutions? Better manageability is the majority respondents, about 64%. Okay, over to you, Narayan.
Thanks, Sunil.
Yeah.
I think with that background, I guess a lot of you are already aware about zero trust and the importance of zero trust. But essentially, why has zero trust become so important and relevant in today's time? I think one of the biggest challenges is, of course, that traditional solutions are not really scaling up to protect against cyber attacks, and that's what we have been seeing in the last year. They have kind of gone through the roof, and ransomware attacks have played havoc, like what Sosu and Dan mentioned earlier. So of course, we are not saying that zero trust is a silver bullet, but definitely, it's an approach which can further strengthen the overall security architecture at a very fundamental level. I think that's the biggest difference between a zero trust and other point solutions. So generally, the way we approach cybersecurity or have been approaching cybersecurity for the last 2 decades is, you have a problem, you develop a point product, and then that kind of solves the problem. And then you keep adding more and more layers. And fundamentally, we have not really tried to change things at an architecture level. What zero trust does is, it comes with a new new view that you need to look at things more fundamentally, and there's only so much that you can achieve by adding more and more layers. Next slide, please. So essentially, how do we protect our systems, right? If we take a step back and see how we are doing it, and is this the best way to do it, and is it really giving us results? So you look at any standard, architecture today, whether it's multiple data centers or multi-cloud or hybrid ecosystems as we call them today. The way to access those systems is still largely centralized, which means that you have your users and they have their devices, and you have applications which are hosted typically in the data center or in cloud or multi-cloud environment, and you are required to connect to a central network primarily to establish trust. So this is the model that we refer to largely as the trust but verify model, wherein you trust the network. So anybody who accesses, for example, these resources on the cloud or in the data center from this network, as long as they are coming from this network, it's all good. But that's where that fundamental assumption itself is being challenged. Because as we know, and as we saw, the Vivek also mentioned, how the attack progresses. Lateral movement has become very common today, and lateral movement is possible today because of force controls on the network and these kind of assumptions that if you come from a private network, it's trusted. It's not really the case. Any machine which is connected to the network today, whether it is the internet or an internal network, you have the same level of risk, and there's not too much difference because everybody accesses email. And today, one of the most exploited or the most used attack vectors is phishing via email. So any system can get infected, and then that malware can just move laterally in the network. So is there a better way of implementing cybersecurity in a distributed environment? And the way that we do it today, itself causes a lot of concern. Now, for example, look at it from an IoT perspective. IoT is expected to, IoT devices are expected to, exponentially grow over the next 2 to 3 years. Imagine all those IoT devices trying to connect to a central network and from there trying to access resources. It's just unimaginable. So you will end up, bypassing a lot of security rather than trying to, enforce this kind of centralized architecture. And that is where zero trust becomes very, very powerful. Next slide, please. So before we get into at an architecture level how zero trust works on the ground, I would just like to touch upon a few conceptual elements of zero trust, right? Some of which we are already familiar. The way it is done or the way it is implemented is slightly different. So principle of least privilege, that's the golden standard of cybersecurity. You only allow access to the extent that it is required, right? This is implemented very well today at the application layer, role-based access, so on and so forth. Implemented very poorly at the network or infrastructure layer. And that's what zero trust is trying to change. Again, we're talking about authenticating users and devices. User authentication is still robust to a large extent, especially if you have 2FA to complement the traditional password-based authentication. The challenge comes in device authentication. Many a times, when we talk about a user accessing an application, it is kind of assumed that the device that he or she is using is either inherently secure or it belongs to the organization, and very few checks and balances are put in there. What zero trust talks about is making that entire thing more robust. How can you kind of create a combination identity, move from just looking at the device IP or MAC address to kind of creating an identity for the device itself and then combining with the user identity, which makes the overall authentication authorization process very, very robust. The third point is very important: grant precise access. Now, this precision access is something that is, again, we're talking at the infrastructure layer, right? Now, zero trust is here to primarily transform the way that we provide network access. And today, precision access is just not there. Why? Because it's too complicated to use traditional firewalls to implement or enforce precise access. So this becomes very, very important. This is also referred to as microsegmentation, which means that the user and device is provided access to only those applications on the network that he or she is supposed to access. Today, it's more of a generic VLAN to VLAN based access. then I think this is where zero trust kind of differed from all the traditional concepts, which is we talk about a perimeter-less security model, right? So essentially today the way we design cybersecurity is we draw a perimeter, put everything, all the assets inside the perimeter, and we try to fortify it. Now, if you're looking at a distributed environment, especially with COVID, now users have also become distributed. Earlier, only applications were distributed. The perimeter is kind of completely vanished, right? It doesn't make any sense to have a single perimeter and try to defend things which are inside it. And then finally, we are talking about securing all communication. Now, if you look at security of communication, the first thing that pops to your mind is, of course, encryption. So now the million-dollar question is, do we encrypt all communication inside the network, right? Generally, encryption is something that we do for remote access, especially if you are accessing stuff in an untrusted network, right? But if you look at it from a zero trust perspective, you need to secure all communication, whether you're inside or outside your network. It doesn't matter. Because like I said earlier, the risk is the same, whether you're on the internet or you're inside your network. If the attacker gets in, he can just start sniffing all your traffic if it's not encrypted. So very, very important. So certain fundamental concepts which need to, the thought process needs to change significantly, and certain concepts that we already know, which need to be augmented and extended to more at an infrastructure level. Now, what are the analyst firms saying? So, of course, zero trust, just to touch upon the history, a couple of minutes, it was something that was conceptualized by Department of Defense and Homeland Security about 10 years ago. Forrester picked it up, somewhere in 2010, and then they published a white paper where it became more popular. And the analyst firms are predicting that 2022, 23, more than 80% of businesses will start accessing applications through zero trust, because the existing controls are just not sufficient to secure your overall environment, because there's only so much that you can depend on in terms of detection and response. Next slide, please. So how does this actually work on the ground, right? So conceptually, it sounds pretty good. So essentially, if you look at any standard enterprise network today, right? So you have a user. That user has got a laptop, mobile, some kind of device, and then they typically access applications. So today we assume that the network is trusted. What zero trust does is you create another layer on top of it. So you introduce a gateway in front of those resources, and then you introduce an agent on the endpoint. And essentially what happens is now you bind this user to this device, and you make sure that these resources are not visible to anybody else on the network, right? So they only see this gateway, and they have no clue, the attacker has no clue, what is behind it. So one of the attacks that it can, or rather, the most important benefit that you get is when you do a reconnaissance, right? You don't even know what is behind this gateway. So the chances that you can compromise something which you don't know is, very, very remote, right? So that's one of the biggest advantages that you have. And of course, you have a centralized policy engine with which you can, push these policies. Now, before I end, just to summarize, what are the benefits that you get from adopting a zero trust approach? So, of course, you can get access only from authorized users and devices. Most importantly, your attack surface gets reduced dramatically, which automatically results in prevention of malware and ransomware attacks. And more importantly, you get a unified access fabric across on-premise, cloud, and multi-cloud environments. So with that, I would like to end my session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Narayanan. Since we are slightly overshot with the time, I'll quickly move to our next speaker, Rob Taylor. Rob is a senior cybersecurity incident handler at Royal Mail Group. His focus is on translating the cybersecurity requirements gaps into executive level understanding to protect the business now and for the future. Rob is also a military veteran in IT and intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, operations 20 years plus, and further 10 years in SME business leadership and technology roles. Rob, welcome on board. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sunil. Good afternoon and good evening to you all. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to represent the buying side. And I'm going to admit up front, it's an extremely extensive sector out there in terms of cyber tooling, cyber threat intelligence, and all the other cyber-related facilities that we have at hand. Next slide, please, Sunil. Thank you. So I'm going to briefly cover these aspects, but the key question here is, how do you get the board to spend money in cybersecurity tools, and particularly around DeepTech, when I think we all know, or we might have seen the cartoon, which shows the money jar pretty much empty. Sorry, thank you. Pretty much empty before the cyber breach. And then the jar is very full and brimming with money after the cyber breach. Now, we all have read statistics, I'm sure, on the cost of ransomware and how much to invest in those protective or defensive measures. But the context really is, depends on your company, and speaking for large to SME level, depends on the context of your company, where you are in the market. Dan mentioned about the societal awareness, the culture of cybersecurity in the company, in society, what those threats are to your company, and again, the company's risk appetite. I think we've heard that the cyber insurance market is quite an interesting place to be as well. They will cover what will they cover, but it's still quite an interesting market. So the context has to be set, and certainly from the experience I've had in SME through to large, there is this perceived disconnect between the cyber professionals and the executive team, although it is getting better. But how do we convince the cyber team to really part with that information and that non-geekery, excuse my language, and convert that into volumetrics and risk mitigation and risk impact? That's where we're really looking. Well, how I've done it and how the teams have done it who I've worked with is the volumes of the detection and how we respond to those detections, whether it's on our firewalls, whether it's in our SIEM tooling, Azure Sentinel, QRadar, Splunk, all those types. And then what we do with that data in terms of event analysis, what are we seeing event-wise? On those events, how can we then use that to leverage our threat hunting tools that we might have available, our resources? And as Kaustubh mentioned about, people are hiring hits. I've recently helped the NCSC develop their ransomware as a service exercise in a box. And that's part of that is how can we use threat hunting? But I've came back to one particular point. You'll notice some repetition across each of my stovepipes. Exercise regime. The NCSC provides exercise in a box, and I find no better translator of where the cyber team are and what they're doing into real life demonstrable discussions through exercises. I'm not talking about red teaming penetration exercises. I'm talking about real discussion where there are gray areas in overlaps between teams within the organization, gray areas in terms of process ownership, actions, runbooks, for instance. Do we have definitive steps in our runbooks for each of those areas? But I know a lot of the practitioners, particularly the incident responders, will say, well, every situation is different. And it does come across that way, but there's still boxes of activity or runbooks that we can play to that. So it's about being able to provide the volumetrics, provide a real tangible discussion piece around an exercise regime, and then putting that together to give the executive level short, little tidbits of information about what's happening. And I've done that regularly. My team does it, where we're just continually feeding in to the executive level, small and regular. And on the basis that we've had some real hits, and coming back to Narayan's point about seeing the scams increasing over COVID of 400%, we were in a very good position in one of the companies, quite a large company, to show the data, and the trend was increasing towards, say, for instance, scam domains. The public expects us to deliver a service. If the public's view is that we're not doing enough in order to reduce scams, their trust is not going to be with us. So looking at offensive security as well as defensive security, we were able to make the case very quickly and invest in that. But the marketplace, as I said, is proliferated with tools. And I often find in the businesses I've worked where some tools come into fashion and they go out of fashion based on where the business is focusing at that time, and also what the threat landscape is looking like. So again, using threat hunting, using exercise regime, and feeding into the executive level, again, keeps the executive warm, but also gives us a more rounded view of what the context of our business is trying to protect. So we all know the protection in depth, but we also need to make sure that we are using every tool available. And this is where DeepTech really is quite exciting. Many companies will talk about innovation, and I can't see a better way of leveraging innovation than in deep tech, in the AI and the ML sphere, because the future is where it is. We can scan the horizon for new threats, we can exercise, we can respond using machine learning, but that ability to rapidly equip ourselves for the next threat will reduce the amount of impact that these incidents or events will have on our organization. And I put validation and endorsement in there. It's difficult sometimes when faced with a number of tools, when you're looking to mitigate a risk, to know which one to purchase. And we all know, value for money case, is it a low cost? Does it do the job? And what the operational expenditure will be to support that over a 3 to 5 year timescale or whatever that might be. But there's nothing better, and this is where Tech UK adds its value, I'm sure, to have a collective view on tooling, on those tools which are effective for those sectors and those threats which affect those sectors. So in summary, trying to get the right level of investment for your cyber threat as it is requires the cyberspace and really the cyber battle space operators to collect the volumetrics, collect the information from, continuously exercising, and to keep feeding that in to the executive team level to say, you gave us money for these tools, this is the impact it had based on these hypotheses, and we would like to continue this this process going. And can we have an element of innovation as we move forward to use the future tools, the AI, the MLs, to protect ourselves over the horizon, because it makes all the sense for the bottom line. And that's it for me this afternoon. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rob. With that, we conclude our first stage of the webinar today. We would be now getting into our next stage, of a panel discussion. I encourage, before we get down into the panel discussion, I encourage the audience to please post your questions. Personally, this is very, very insightful session that I have had out of so many sessions that I've attended. I think these are really very practical view coming from the industry, like Dan covered, the product owners like Kaustubh and Narayanan covered, and the user industry like Bob covered. So I think they're really, really very important points. And this power-packed panel is there. You should leverage this time to kind of clarify any kind of doubt that you may have. So with that, I request you to please post your questions. And in the meanwhile, we move to the panel discussion. And once the panel is done, we would come back and answer all your questions. All right. May I request all the panelists to put on your videos and be ready for what we'll be doing is, since we already overshot time of a bit, I request all the panelists look at your questions and please try and answer them for about a minute's time with your insights and answers, and we move to the next. So we have 2 rounds of questions. If time permits, we'll be able to complete both the rounds. Otherwise, we'll move some of the questions to Q&A session. And if you're able to attend all of them, otherwise we'll post a blog answering all the questions that we may ask in the panel. Thank you so much. With that, I move forward. My first question to Dan is, what are the top drivers that make enterprise use deep tech providers within the cyber domain? Dan, your industry perspective, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. So it's an interesting question. I think what I'd say to that is that, linking back to my earlier interjection, I think, you know, cybersecurity is an enabler of growth within a business. So, you know, these emerging technologies, whatever sector they're in, not only protecting existing infrastructure and services, but a potential growth opportunities for a business. And that's ultimately what speaks to the boardroom. So, you know, when we're making a case for cybersecurity solutions and technologies, we should be making that case rather than we've got to protect against this threat or that threat. That's important, yeah. But actually what cybersecurity technologies can do is help the business grow and develop new areas and underpin new technologies, as we've seen throughout the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dan, indeed. My next question to Kaustubh. What are the top threats and the impact on business? What, in your experience, are the key threat actors behind confirmed breaches? This is again related to your platform, which collects a lot of data and validates like what was the root cause. So I hope this is the most relevant question.
Yeah, absolutely, Cyril. So I mean, just to reiterate, as I mentioned in my slide earlier, if I had to pick one top threat, I would say it is organized cybercrime. And obviously this organized cybercrime manifests itself in various forms, where you have ransomware attacks, you have data breaches, you have distributed denial of service attacks, like the one we saw New Zealand exchange being out for a week, right? And then we all know about WannaCry and NotPetya affecting global industries, right, for extended periods of time. So if you look at the impact obviously leads to downtime for the business. Operational continuity comes under a cloud. There is a reputation loss there. And again, the impact also depends on the specific unique situation in which a company finds itself in. For example, there have been situations where an organization was about to go in for an IPO and a breach was disclosed, which affected this listing price or stock price. There have been situations where there was an M&A happening under process. In the case of Yahoo or Verizon, where we saw the valuations getting chopped off by almost 1 billion. So it is all about the specific context, but largely it is about lots of management overheads, senior management spending a lot of time on remediating the incident, brand reputation loss, financial loss, fraud losses in the case of the Bangladesh heist, which costed about $81 million, right? And if you ask about the threat actors, I mean, these are all obviously global operations. So it's very difficult to do an attribution unless it's a multi-cooperation action taken by something like Interpol, where multiple joint operations conducted by various countries, and then they had the CLOP ransomware actors taken down, right? So those are some of the things you can't really attribute it. It's a global operations. You can't really put a finger and say this was the person who did it.
Well, very well. Thank you so much, Kaustubh. With that, I would move to Narayanan with our next question. Narayanan, what, as per you, are the top attack vectors? I guess.
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We can hear you now.
Yeah. So I think that's an easy one, because phishing, or rather email, is one of the most used attack vectors, and of course the network. So I think these two continue to be the most used attack vectors. So email, of course, phishing and malware dropping is what they do via email. If you look at statistics, phishing is successful even in mature organizations to the tune of 7% of users still, giving away their password to a phishing campaign. So imagine 7 out of 100 even in mature organizations. So you have to assume that your passwords are gone already when you build a cybersecurity. And of course, if you look at overall networks, then lateral movement is something that is becoming very, very popular, wherein attackers move from one system to the other. So these are the two which are really, really exploited.
Great, thanks, Narayan. With that, I move to Rob. Rob, what are the top drivers of security spending, since you're coming from industry? So your personal views, your experience would be really valuable here.
Yeah, thank you. It's a combination of the top risk, cybersecurity risks, being quantified and understood at board level is really one of the drivers. And unfortunately, I think the other one is a combination of event volumes in a specific area or post-incident recovery. I haven't got first-line experience of that, but it's certainly what I've read. But yes, it's usually after the event. The gap is funded, but yeah, definitely top risk and after the event.
Thanks, Rob. With that, I get into the second round. Maybe you can use this opportunity to answer to this question as well as any concluding remarks, and then we go to the next slide. So Dan, again, how can third-party vendors help CISOs to improve the cybersecurity performance and move it closer to the business?
Thanks, and I think I'd make three points to this question. I think first is just building out a point Rob made in his presentation actually about collaboration, and that collaboration runs through the entire, so collaborating with different parts of the business on tooling or on process approaches, whatever it might be, but also within the marketplace as well. So ultimately, cyber's a sector with a busy marketing place and spend. So you see various organizations that offer silver bullets in numerous different ways, and none of them are. What you actually need is better communication. So, when speaking to vendors and different organizations, what's the outcome? What is realistically this technology or this process, this solution going to do is the key, and knowing ultimately what you're buying. And it's difficult because in this space, some of the people that are procuring cyber technologies, especially amongst SMEs, don't have the understanding of what these technologies do, in that technical detail that we've got into on this call. So it's really difficult, and that's why building that skill out is hugely important. I think another point, just building on that, is that CISOs have a difficult job, and it's an evolving role all the time. We've just released a report actually that's looking at what the CISO role looks like post-COVID, and I think the technical people always put cybersecurity in that technical box. It's a technical discipline. You've got to know about threat intelligence and all these words that people outside the sector don't understand. Ultimately, though, it's about ingraining that into the business itself, and to do so, the people within the CISO or within the CISO function have got to be leading that charge, building the skill throughout the organization, but also communicating, what the reality is, what we need, when we need it, and how we need to use it.
Excellent, Dan. Thanks so much for your insights. Moving back to Kaustubh. Kaustubh, are security operations centers, SOCs, fit for the purpose?
So if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, generally fit for purpose SOC would be expected to detect, prevent, and respond to attacks, right? But for the last 5 years, you've seen that the landscape has changed. So you have cloud, you have remote working, you have a lot of mobile apps, but the API economy is booming as well. So the threat attack surface is actually magnified a lot. So if you ask me today, the definition of fit for purpose definitely has changed. So in addition to detect, prevent, respond, I would also add ability to anticipate a threat and neutralize a threat even before it materializes.
Right.
These two would have to be added to the definition to make today's SOC fit for purpose.
Thank you so much, Costa. Moving to Narayanan. Narayanan, what is an effective approach to reduce the attack surface?
So if you look at attack surface, traditionally the most used approach was to fix vulnerability, right? And that's the real challenge that people are facing. That is not really effective anymore. So that's where we are moving towards more of a zero trust approach, or a kind of invisibility kind of approach, wherein you only allow principle of least privilege, enforce that, and that really helps you cut down what access you actually give to begin with, and then it becomes easier to monitor, which is whatever little window that you have opened up. So if you look at the future, reducing the attack surface will automatically, one of the best ways to do that is to adopt zero trust kind of approach.
Yeah, thank you so much, Narayan. Rob, how often is cybersecurity on the agenda of the board?
I think in the last year, it's certainly on the agenda more often than it has been for the last 4 or 5 would be my guess. And as I mentioned, my view, and from my presentation, I think it's incumbent on the CISO organization, the cybersecurity professionals, to make sure it's on there. It's okay being asked to provide a synopsis of what's been happening, but if that ask isn't there, make sure it's pushed in there. I know from experience, I put information on a page, a brief on a page, nice graphs, a few things happening, what's been happening, what we've done, and that just keeps the dialogue going. There's also ask questions about any aspects of it. So if it's not on there, make sure it's on there. It's more often than it has been for the last 4. It's good to keep it nice and warm on the agenda. And of course, we want to avoid it being clearly on the agenda after the incident. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Interestingly, we got a good question from audience. And I think Kaustubh and Narayanan can pick this up, and maybe Dan or Rob, maybe you can add. So the question is, how can multi-vector DDoS attacks be mitigated by leveraging AI/ML from an infrastructure perspective?
I saw that one I think it was for me. I've got a view, but it's probably not as swept up as my esteemed panel guests. Panel members.
So, I mean, there is no silver bullet to, detecting a multi-vector DOS attack. But I mean, some of the specific things that we can definitely look at is, these DOS attacks generally tend to be launched from various devices with specific post GET requests and specific user agents. So if you have a smart enough web application firewall, which runs AI/ML at the backend, it may be able to distinguish between normal and malicious user agents, and then try to drop the packet. That is the answer I would probably give you.
Just to add there, I would make a distinction between volumetric based DOS attacks and application based DOS attacks. So what Kaustubh typically mentioned will take care of only the application based DOS attacks. The volumetric based DOS attack, there's only one solution: you have to absorb the attack. So whether you like it or not, the cost of launching a DOS attack is probably $250, $300. The cost of protecting against is at least 10 times. But that's the reality that we all live in, and that's how it has to be done.
Right. Another interesting question. While we all know that malicious domains have peculiar names, why is that so? And wouldn't smarter malicious domains avoid that?
So let me pick that as well. So generally, for a phishing attack to be successful, you need to convince the victim that it is a legitimate website. And that's where most of these attackers tend to create similar looking domains, right? And that is where smart algorithms are able to pick up these abnormal or similar looking domains, match them against their infrastructure, and then identify them as malicious and take response actions like blocking them, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation even for the attackers, but that's where we have a window of opportunity as defenders.
Sorry, I was on mute. Rob, a question for you. Quantifying risk is an important part of getting executive buy-in and looking into potential tech investments. How do we get risk management stakeholders to get on board with the initiative?
Yeah, I often find the statement a cliche, as in good question. The Executive Risk Management Committee will have the dashboard, which has hopefully got a cybersecurity quantified risk against it. I would expect a level of investment to mitigate, to take that risk and calculate the size of the program, which might be required to mitigate that risk. Obviously, mitigation doesn't negate the risk. But if it was sitting, say for instance, if it was sitting high numbers on the critical risk score, as an executive board, you couldn't ignore that. If anything happened, again, we're looking post-incident, if anything happened and there was an audit to say, but you were cognizantly, fully cognizant of the scoring on that, what was the board's decision around mitigating that, or a lack of mitigation? It's very, very difficult to stand up and justify none because the board didn't understand the question. I would say it's, again, the CISO's challenge in order to convince the board for the stake at the table in terms of financial and acceptance of the stakeholder, the risk stakeholder, that they must do something about that. Obviously, you can't address the whole risk register, but it would be extremely naive to not take the top 1, 3, 5, or however it's categorized and do something about it. I think the shareholders would certainly expect it. I think the resulting impact of that risk turning into an issue, stroke incident, would clearly rest around, would need to be mitigated. So what I'm saying is the governance plays a part as well. So
Absolutely.
Very, very long answer, I'm afraid, but not easy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Dan, there's a question for you. Can DeepTech address insider threats proactively?
Sure. So I think let me just broaden out, touch on the previous question as well, actually. So we've probably gone through 2 years where convincing a board to implement new technologies has probably never been easier. I think the best organizations going forward need to be the ones where when you take something to the board and say, we need to implement this, we need to get this technology, security's got to be baked in. We're always talking about secure by design as a sector. Like the kind of warning signs for a board would be, we need to purchase technology, but we haven't looked at X, Y, and Z along with the cyber implications. So I think that's just kind of a broader kind of point there. I think in terms of addressing insider threats proactively, I mean, other panelists might be best placed to give a kind of more technical view. I suppose what I'd say, and it links back to an earlier question as well, is that, ultimately a lot of the attacks that we see are still going to be mitigated against by, simple measures on the whole. Certainly the kind of broad attacks that we see under monikers to do with COVID-19, the phishing campaigns, ransomware stuff, a lot of this is about general awareness and understanding. Mm-hmm. and that links into this question as well. I think, the high end is the area where DeepTech can really, play a larger role and identify trends that maybe, people aren't grasping. But I think ultimately it's a long-term journey, and improving skills little by little, and understanding is the way to go. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that one as well.
Thanks, Dan. Rob, there's another question for you, probably the last one. There are a number of failing cybersecurity controls despite state-of-the-art AI, ML, and other power-packed platforms. What's the realistic approach or architecture, governance, objectives-driven, risk-based? I think there are too many questions in that, but the key question is, how can a cyber control fail despite of making most advanced investments?
Yeah, from experience, I have seen controls implemented and then bypassed through separate organizational change. So it's about being completely connected up with. Okay, we see cybersecurity as probably a subset of IT service delivery, IT service management. So it's about connecting up. And by the way, I'm not pointing my fingers at any IT service counterparts, but it has to be joined up. If a control is implemented and fails, one is has the control addressed the original policy that was missing? Has it addressed the original use case which they were trying to implement? But ultimately, it's about testing and education. I think controls fail because either they've not been landed well enough as a project, the knowledge has not been transferred to those who are using it, and to monitor those controls, and to implement and test those controls on a regular basis. And then ultimately, it could be that the threat landscape has shifted on, and that control, which was covering part of your threat landscape, is now no longer in use. It might be a legacy piece of equipment that's been, disabled, moved off the infrastructure. That's just my view. I'm sure, again, my esteemed colleagues will have a view on it. Right.
One final round. Just in one sentence, why DeepTech and organizations should adopt, and what is the specific area they should be immediately investing in, considering the trends that we are seeing? Just one sentence. And maybe, Dan, we can start from you and go with the sequence with Kaustubh, Narayanan, and then Rob.
Sorry, we're cutting out a little bit on my end.
One last concluding statement. Why DeepTech, and then which domain do you recommend, considering the current trends?
Okay, yeah, so I think I'd kind of just repeat a point I made earlier about it being, technology is one element of a key triangle, a technology, people, process. And, DeepTech will allow technology to play an increasing role in that. If I were going to pick a certain domain, I suppose I'd go with AI, in that it's probably most readily adopted at the moment and the most mature.
All right. Kaustubh?
So I would say that, there is no alternative. We already see threat actors using AI and ML, to launch sophisticated attacks, bypass security mechanisms. So if we have to keep pace with these, adversaries, there is no alternative for us but to adopt some of these and try and improve, our defenses.
Right. Thank you. Narayanan?
I think it's a race. So the bad actors have already started collaborating and using, futuristic technologies. So it's but obvious that we need to, get onto that bandwagon if we need to protect ourselves. So I guess AI, ML, blockchain, these are going to be the technologies of choice.
Absolutely. Rob?
Yeah, I'm going to sweep up as DeepTech. Nothing should be off the table because, as Kaustubh had said, the threat actors are already using these tools. But I think it's innovation. We need to get the innovation on the table, the board, to say we need to use these new techniques. I can't show you what they'll deliver yet, but they'll certainly start countering those threats on the horizon, the current threats and those on the horizon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Indeed, very interesting, very insightful panel discussions, and thanks to the audience for posting so many relevant questions and being able to get more out of the esteemed panel out here. What we do is we would be moving to the last concluding session of our webinar today. And I'd be requesting Rob to kind of share his final thoughts or key points to take away. Before that, we would be running a poll. I request all the audience to please participate in the poll. The poll has, you may be able to see it on your screen. Please participate in the poll and we would move to the last session. All right, we're seeing huge response. Still request. Oh, yeah. So which of the below solutions are relevant for your organization? I think dark web intel comes 77%, zero trust unified secure access comes 92%. None of these is just 8%. So I think we need to be investing some time to understand why these 8% things, none of these, or they've already invested. Moving to the next question, do you have budgets to invest in deep tech within the next 6 months? 46% says yes, 54% says no. 46% still is a huge number, and I wish you all the best with your initiatives and investments. The last question is, would you like to know more? Yes, ready for a POC. Yes, need more information. So good news. I think about 23 plus 46%, a majority of audience thinks that they need, and especially the 23%, I think they need to go for POC. That's a very good positive sign that they're already thinking about investment in deep techs and they want to understand looking at it in real life. Great, thank you so much. So we can end this poll and move to the last session. And I would request Rob to kind of please pass on the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Sunil. Thank you, Network Science and Tech UK, for inviting me along today. But my closing thoughts are really that we all know the cyber battle space operators, they need to be able to translate the battle as it currently is. Those people who are involved in the day-to-day ongoing mitigation of the threats and dealing with the incidents need to know and communicate to the executive team through the volumetrics, which they are constantly seeing. They need to be able to show through exercises the live attack data as well to strengthen their case, but because it's not a case of making their life easier, it's about that a passion within those cyberspace professionals who want to protect the business. They understand that protecting the business protects jobs and protects reputation. So the overreaching strategy, as I see it, is that investment must include deep tech. It must include finances for innovation, because we know that just over the horizon, as we saw with COVID, things change very quickly, and that can affect the global situation very quickly. So it's for protecting the business beyond the here and now. And thank you for today.
Thank you very much, Rob. And thank you to Network Science and Tech UK for organizing this wonderful webinar on a very interesting topic, which is the next wave of managing cybersecurity functions using deep tech. I also thank each of the panel members for bringing out such valuable insights and practical insights that I hope would be very, very useful for the audience. Last but not least, thanks to all of the audience for being such a wonderful audience, an engaging audience. And I hope you have taken some insights and points for you to drive within your organizations, and wish you all the best. With that, the last point, all of these, the webinar, the slides would be made available on our website. The Q&A would also be made available on the blog. So please watch this space and stay in touch. With that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful day and a nice time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.